Welcome to another tale in Tales Upon a Time. In my channel, you'll find different kinds of stories. You'll find some of Aesop's fables. You'll find stories that I've made up from ideas you've given me or ideas on cards. And today, another kind of story which is called a folk tale. Now, folk tales are stories or tales that are handed down from one generation to the other, and sometimes people added their own parts of the story using their imaginations. I'm also going to be using today a musical instrument, and you can use all sorts of things, anything that will make a sound or a noise that sounds like something in your story would be perfect to add a little bit to it. I'm using fabrics as well. This is behind me, this is the sea. So we're going to use our imaginations, and I'm going to tell you the story of the Bosham Bell. Come back with me over 1,000 years to the time when the Vikings began to invade other countries. The Vikings lived in Scandinavia, today's Sweden, Finland and Denmark. And they made all their own outfits, all their own shields and coats, and they sailed in boats called longships, which were enormous. They were 30 metres long, which is very long indeed. And carved on the front and the back of the longship were enormous carvings of dragons or snakes, which were highly decorated with paint and other things as well, to make them look really, really frightening. To push the boat along, there was an enormous sail, also with quite a scary picture on the side of it. So you can imagine what this must have looked like. On this particular day, at a place called Bosham, a little inlet of the English Channel, people were going about their everyday lives. There were the ordinary people who were looking after their cattle and their sheep, others who were hoeing the garden and looking after the crops. Others might have been weaving and making clothing. Others might even be doing things with metalwork. But as well as that, in Bosham, there was a monastery, and this was where the monks lived, and they prayed and they sang, and they listened to the people who were part of their community. And they listened at times to the sound of the sea as it rolled in and out onto the sand at the edge of the shore of Bosham. But on this particular day, as the tide came in and out, far away in the distance, they saw a fearful sight. There was the sight of some amazing picture on like a piece of material. There was the head of a dragon, and as it got nearer and nearer, they began to hear the oars in the water moving the boat nearer and nearer, and they saw the head of the dragon, and the people and the monks became really, really afraid, and they began, and they ran, and they ran, and they ran. So as soon as the boat moved up to the shore and the edge of the water, the Vikings, and there might well have been 50 or 60 of them, got out of their longship and began to make their way into the village of Bosham. And they looked around, they looked in the houses, they looked everywhere to see what they could squander, what they could pilfer, what they could steal that would be valuable to them. And then they saw the monastery. And on the top of the monastery was an enormous bell tower. And they said in their own language, "We will go in and we will take whatever we can." And so they opened the door of the monastery, and in they went, and they found all sorts of things, valuable jewels and gold and caskets. And then they climbed up into the belfry, the bell tower, and there were a ring of 6 bells, some smaller, some a bit larger, but the one in the middle, the tenor bell, was enormous, and they decided that was the bell they would take. And so there were so many of the men that they were able to carry the bell down the bell tower, out through the door, and they must have been panting and perspiring with the weight of this bell until they got it in the middle of their Viking longship, and they put it in the middle, along with all the other things that they had stolen. And they set sail to make their way out, away from Bosham and back to their own country. But what happened next was extraordinary, because by this time the people of Bosham began to move back into their village, and the monks moved back into their monastery, and the three of the monks climbed up into the belfry and began to ring to ring the bells that were still left. And as they rang the bell that was in the middle of the longboat began to ring too, and it was so heavy that it crashed through the middle of the longship onto the bottom of the ocean or the floor of the sea, and all the men were plunged into the water too and drowned. Many, many years later, in the Victorian times, 100 years later, 150 years later, people in the village decided to try and drag the bell out. And they used cattle to try and use ropes to pull and pull and pull on the tenor bell. But it couldn't be done. And the bell just went back into the water. This is the strange thing. Sometimes, if you go down to the edge of the water at Bosham and you wait for the bells to ring in the tower, out in the channel, you will hear the sound of the tenor bell too.